All right, great. I think we can get started here. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Jeremy from Midtown Reader, an independent bookstore here in Tallahassee. And tonight we're excited to have Marina Brown, author of The Orphan of Pitigliano. I'll tell you more about the book and about Marina in a second. But first, I want to let you know that you can submit a question at any time during the event using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll leave a few minutes at the end for those. I also want to let you know that you can purchase this book from Midtown Reader at midtownreader.com by giving us a call or by stopping by. We're open for browsing Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 6, Sundays from 10 to 4, and Monday afternoons by appointment. We also offer delivery for anywhere in Tallahassee, and we will happily ship anywhere outside of Tallahassee. And now a little bit about tonight's author. Marina Brown has written for newspapers and magazines for the last 20 years, including the St. Petersburg Times, the Tallahassee Democrat, Florida Design, and Dance Magazine. She is the recipient of numerous national writing awards, 2 first-place awards in the Porter Fleming Short Story Contest, 2nd place in the Lorraine Hemingway Contest for Short Stories, 1st place in the Red Hills Poetry Contest, and she received the Florida Authors and Publishers Association Silver Medal for her poetry volume, The Leaf Does Not Believe It Will Fall. In 2020, Brown was nominated for the State of Florida Poet Laureate. Brown's novels, Land Without Mirrors and Lisbeth, both won gold medals in literary fiction from the FAPA. Her most recent work of historical fiction, The Orphan of Pitigliano, won both the Florida Writers Association's Royal Palm Literary Awards Gold Medal for published historical fiction, as well as the top award, the 2020 Published Book of the Year. Brown is a former professional ballet dancer with Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, a blue water sailor, a watercolorist with solo exhibitions throughout Florida, including the Lemoyne and Gadsden Museums, a cellist with the Tampa Bay Symphony, and a traveler. She lives in Tallahassee. And now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the book. As the Nazis menace Italy before the outbreak of World War II, 17-year-old Giuliana, her 2 cousins, and their families flee to a 13th century hill town to conceal their Jewish identities. Yet there is love to be found amidst oncoming tragedy, as well as dangers far greater than the Nazi threat. Treasures of Etruscan tombs, an unholy perversion, and above all, il malocchio, I'm sure you will correct me on that, the evil eye, in some tear the cousins apart. Now, 30 years after the war, Giuliana lies in a strange trance in Boston, felled by the evil eye's long reach, in a jealousy that will not die. In a sweeping panorama of Italy, secrets of 3 generations unravel in a conclusion no one anticipated, except, perhaps, the mysterious eye. All right, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to get the cover of the book out there for you. Thank you so much. I think we're going to get started here with a quick reading by you to get everybody in the mood here.
Okay, well, first of all, Jeremy, thank you so much. You can hear me, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Thank you, and thank you to Midtown Reader. It's always a thrill to talk to the faithful of a local bookstore, and I really appreciate that, and the listeners who love the written word. So thank you for inviting me. Yeah, you did a wonderful kind of rundown overview of the book, and it's when you said the word sweeping, it is a book that goes kind of back and forth between 2 continents and over 30 years. The middle part of the book, which takes place in Italy, takes place in Giuliana's memory. So what we will hear a reading from right now is her remembering the time when she, her 2 cousins, and their respective families were fleeing Florence, Italy, heading to Tuscany, the middle country of Tuscany, to a hilltop village called Pitigliano, where there was a ghetto, a very ancient one, where Jews for centuries had found protection and peace. And so these 2 families are hoping to find it too, since the Nazis are now in the land and they're fleeing for their own hope for protection. So we meet Giuliana and her family as they're at this moment hiding in one of the tufa tombs. This is stone tombs that have been carved out over the centuries by the Etruscans, and they're hiding there at this moment. Giuliana could smell the earth. She could smell the people who huddled against it like worms, hoping to find a soft patch in which to burrow. Without lights, she could smell their breath and tell which of her relatives had eaten a morsel of bread and which ones saved their own hunger to give a few crumbs to the younger ones. In the darkness, she would let her fingers trace the buttons and hems of their clothes, the coarse stitching of seams, their knitted shawls made from the wool of sheep grazed on this very Italian soil. And though now you couldn't tell they were yellow, she could also feel the rough edges of where stars had been sewn onto the clothes of everyone inside the cave. And in spite of the cold, knowing they were now gone made her feel happy. Only Enrico, it's her uncle, heard the old woman's knock, but when the crude wooden door was shoved open, everyone felt the rush of icy air, and with no more than a shoved finger into a shoulder, the family told each other it was time to go. And ahead of her, Giuliana saw the humped silhouettes of her family as they crawled out on all fours, lumbering camels against an indigo sky. They all stayed very quiet as they climbed, yet Giuliana could not suppress a gasp when the family suddenly emerged from the forested trail and stopped to catch their breath below the towering mass that was Pitigliano. If she were to lie on her back and look up, she was sure the dark hulk that was part mountain and part enormous city would still cover half the velvety sky. It looked impenetrable. A city that had always been there, from ancient peoples of the East to Etruscans to Romans to the medieval Medici lords, built on a platform of stone where 6- and 7-story buildings, towers and turrets, fountains and crenellated walls roughly clawed at the sky. We must be very careful here, very, very quiet, Giuliana's uncle whispered from the head of the line. The guide says there was a rally here last night, fascist youth from Milano, well-trained and excitable. She does not believe they have left. They had been climbing for a half hour in silence, plunging through thick brush and across ancient Etruscan excavations where their shadows threaded together in a visual echo of their sweating chain, when suddenly, only steps from Giuliana, Rebecca, her cousin, dropped to her knees. "A snake, Mama, a snake!" It was hatching season for vipers in the Tuscan hills, and Rebecca had careened off the path, hitting her head, and now lay on the ground, gripping her calf. A snake nearby, fascist on the slope, and it was impossible to see. Giuliana's father asked for a match, then quickly doused it. "It is nothing but a thorn, a drop of blood and a scratch on your head. Now be very still, or..." The burst of light from the metal torch seemed to explode in their faces. Suddenly, the voice behind the light was screaming, "You are in the presence of the Armed Vigilance Corps of the Fascist Youth. We expect immediate compliance. State your names and present your papers." Then, as if intuiting something, the imperious adolescent's tone began to drip with sarcasm. "Or are you gypsies? Are you mentally deficient? Are you Jews?" The one flashlight increased to 4 now, and all of them swerved to play on Giuliana's father and her mother. "What is your name, Jew?" There was a hesitation. Then, "My name is Adolfo," her father replied. Giuliana recognized the tone her father used when he told the punchline to a joke. "Are you a Jew, Adolfo, one out to steal from good Italians and beat their children?" "No." "I believe the answer is yes, at least to one of those questions." A half-tanned face suggests that he was very recently wearing a beard hanging from your face. "Now empty your pockets," the youth screamed, playing the light across the frightened faces and pointing to the ragged coat. Her father turned out his pockets, as did each of the others. Only Giuliana's mother's left hand remained inside the pocket of her jacket. Pull it out, pull it out. What are you hiding?" the young Nazi said, advancing toward her. "Open your hand." After the blow, the flashlight searched belligerently in the dry leaves where the woman had fallen, the scramble of the man who had felled her now echoing high up the slope. And all that Giuliana would remember from that night were her mother's fingers curled around two golden stars, one she had clipped from her husband's coat, and her daughter's, her act of love and hope. So that's how it begins.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting into it again. This actually kind of ties, what you read there ties in nicely with what I wanted to ask you about first, which is, the setting of this is so rich, and so specific. You can almost tell, like, you've been there before. You're shaping it on something that actually, it's a real place and it actually exists. How did you go about getting the idea for this story? Was it the setting that set you off, or were the characters percolating in your head before that? How did it go about? How did this book come about, I guess?
How did it come about? A lot of my books, I think, are begun as little fragments, little pieces, as if you're, going to sew something wonderful, but you get a piece of cloth from here and there. But for me, the setting of a place is what usually stimulates the actual set scene, where I can actually see a plot arrive and the characters populate it. In this case, as you mentioned, there is a woman who lies in a bed in Boston. That was, I was a nurse in another life, and a psychiatric nurse, and I'd been called to the home of an Italian woman who was in a, kind of trance. There's nothing physically wrong with her, but the psychiatrist really wanted her to be seen because something seemed to be going on. When I got there, though, the family basically said, we've already consulted a priest in Italy. He says to send back some of her clothing, a nightgown, something she's worn, back to Italy, because they feel that she's been placed under il malocchio, which means the bad eye, the evil eye, that there's been a curse on her from the old country. So send back some of her clothing. They will remove the curse, send it back. She'll put it on and she'll be fine. Oddly, some months later, when I went back to see this woman who had been lying kind of, inert, she was sitting up, she was eating, she was better. And so I always kind of had that in my mind, that, the belief in il malocchio is still very prevalent in Italy. And then I had gone to Italy many times, but Pitigliano was so filled with mystery, and the ghetto there is unique. You don't often see an intact ghetto, in the middle of Italy. And so maybe later, if you have some pictures, I could actually show you a little bit.
Let me pop those up right now.
Sure.
I think that's a good idea. Here we go. All right, you can see those now?
Yeah, this is actually just a view from one little section of Pitigliano. It is very, very old. Stone houses every place, built on the tufa rock, this soft, easily carved stone that as it's exposed to air gets harder and harder. That's why it's endured so long. So that's one. This is still the synagogue in the old ghetto inside Pitigliano's walls. And within the big crenellated walls of the town, there is a gated section. And you can go into the synagogue. This is what it would have looked like in Giuliana's time. It's been restored now, of course. But you can also go down into the baths, into the place where they made the matzahs. There are ovens there where they cooked for the Sabbath and holidays. And so it's extremely interesting and poignant when you go there. You got another one. Yeah. This is the outside walls of Pitigliano. It was the Orsini Palace is there. There's this amazing aqueduct in the upper right half where from the mountains around there, water had been brought into the town. And it's really quite dramatic at night, especially. What else do you have? When I was there, actually, I went ahead and learned Italian in order to be able to speak to some of these older people, because it took about, I don't know, 3 years to actually do the writing, maybe 2, of the book, although it had been fomenting for many years. But this, especially the old lady in the center with the red scarf, had many memories of what life had been like and when Pitigliano had been bombed by the Americans. She also remembered her parents telling her that they had secreted Jews in the barns where the horses had been kept to hide them from the Nazis. And many Jews pretending to be Catholics and kind of stumbling through the mass. But Italians, it turns out, were much more protective of their Jewish population than many other places in Europe. So these people were very willing to chat with me. It was wonderful, and I got a lot of stories about actually the way things were during this period of the book.
How long were you actually there in the town?
I've been to Pitigliano probably 8 or 9 times now. So, I'd stay for 3 weeks or, a month each time. So I kind of got to know the people.
Right. And is that how you discovered the people you wanted to talk to? Or did you, I guess, how did you go about doing that?
It had begun, I had a boyfriend, a German professor boyfriend who had a house nearby. And so I would go during those years. So he introduced me to Etruscan grave robbers. I actually went out. There are a lot of scenes in the book about Etruscan treasures. And I actually went out one night with the robbers. Very interesting. They have long pipes, and they take these pipes into the forest and pound them down, trying to find soft spots in the soil, because often underneath is a tomb. And once they locate a place that looks promising, they'll dig. Also, down the road from where this professor had his house was a maga, which is like a woman who casts spells. So you would see people coming to visit her to maybe have the evil eye lifted if they thought they had what put on them, or to get potions. And so superstition was very much alive and well in this area. And so all of this kind of wove together into the story, but with fragments of reality.
Right. All right, we've got one more picture here.
Yeah, this, even though she looks like, I don't know, something might have been done in elementary school by, a artistic child or something, but this is an Etruscan bust, a head of someone who would have been on a tomb inside one of the tombs, where Giuliana and some other characters in the book actually go down into. It's really interesting. I mean, they're not Greek statuary. They're kind of gaudy, really, but they're very as if somebody you could know, as you could kind of interact with. There, many in the tombs, they'll have statues lying down together, husbands and wives, and they'll be, cuddling. I mean, they're very realistic figures on the tombs that you can still go down and visit and locate in the hills around this area.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was truly.
And obviously this, caught your imagination enough to want to, go into it. And so So your inkling for the supernatural elements, really you trace back to that psychiatric patient, or?
Well, yeah, and there is something for me about magical realism that
Hmm.
I really do love. Um, Garcia Lorca and all the, especially famous South American writers. There's something, or Kafka,
Yep.
take the cockroach. I love that where you're slipping back and forth into something. It's not fantasy. I personally don't read fantasy, but magical realism is just on the edge of your consciousness, like someone moving over
Hmm.
there and you look and they're not quite there, that kind of surprise. So in each of the other books that you had mentioned, there is that where uh, things can happen, and you're not sure if they really happened, but
Right.
and yet they're based in reality too.
It's fascinating. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. There's there's so many elements to the book. There's obviously the magical realism, the supernatural elements, and then you you cut back and forth between times. Sometimes with the same character, sometimes not. And what what sort of challenges did splitting the time frame like that present themselves to you? Like, oh, go ahead.
Well, no, I mean that is a really good question, and especially in this book because there are many characters and we are going back and forth and back again. Um, it became very much a challenge, and I did have charts, and I, had my calculator. I was working out ages of people. Could that have been
Hmm.
true? And having to go online to see if such and such was actually happening at that time, and what were the Nazis doing when. And so yeah, it was complicated for sure to organize the back and forth part. But I, on the other hand, it's not magical, but it does, I think, kind of leave an audience, leave a reader uh, dangling just enough to want to get a little bit more information what's going to happen, but you don't give it all to them. You take
Hmm.
it back, and then you go back and a little bit more of a peek at what will happen. And yeah, and so
Many
it,
cliffhangers throughout it.
yeah, well, and I do love that. I
Uh-huh.
really do think that that's one, when people say, oh, it's a page turner, or I read this book, overnight.
Hmm.
That's exactly what I want for
Right.
people to be so absorbed in the story, and just every chapter not ending with a period, but with a question mark that they want to go on to see what happens next. Yeah, I like
Right.
it.
And do you find that process, like, I mean, exhausting, energizing? Like, because I mean, there's the just the process of writing your characters and doing the basic plot of the book, but then what you're describing, the research aspect of it. Do you enjoy the research aspect of it and nailing that down?
Oh yeah, I really I love the research aspect, and places it will take you. Not only the research, but the characters themselves. I know you've heard many authors say this, but it really is true that they take on a life of their own at one point or another. And you go to bed and you wake up and you kind of have an idea of where you're going to go, but as you start to write, you realize the character has other things in mind totally. And especially near the end of this book, it was as if all the characters had a certain urgency about what was going to happen, like they
Hmm.
knew. And I was just taking dictation. I was kind of writing as fast as I could near the end, and it was like for me, I couldn't really stop. It was a page turner, and I wanted to see what they wanted to have happen. And
Right.
and in many cases, like the great love of Giuliana, he kept disappointing me, you know, um, and her too.
Yeah.
Um, Another character who is sort of a very bad human being, one more atrocious thing he seemed to want to inflict, and uh, so, yeah, I think at some point an author does need to rein in his characters, or you would go on writing forever. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's interesting. Yeah, it's almost you're reaching your crescendo in the music, and you just want to keep going.
Exactly. Exactly. You can't hold a high note forever, though.
Exactly. So I know you have such varied interests, and you do so many different artistic practices. How many hours a day do you spend writing? Like when you're in a book, do you make that your full-time artistic endeavor, or are you splitting it up between other things?
That's really very interesting, and it typically is how it does work. Where once you're in a book, you're really there. You're, as you say, doing the research, and you're writing, and you're thinking about it all the time. This particular year, however, everything was happening. I had a really big solo exhibit at the Lemoyne. Every one of the galleries with paintings that had to be readied. I, at the same time, had one at the Gadsden Museum that was going on, and I was trying to bring this book in, and yeah, so that was just kind of crazy. But typically, it's as you say, that a book has its life, its birth, its maturity, and finally it finishes. And then I tend to go and paint. For instance, right now I'm doing probably a collection of short stories that I'll do, not another novel right this minute, but so I'm painting a lot. I'm working in pastels that I haven't done in many years. So yeah, I think when God or whomever has been nice enough to surround you with muses or these little artistic demons that live inside you, always have, you've got to feed them, you've got to nurture them, you've got to attend to them, and not ignore one for the other. Like, you've got to practice your cello, you've got to paint, you've got to write, or they get hungry, and I would worry they dry up and die, so yeah, it keeps one busy, but you've been gifted them, so you better take care of them.
Right. That's interesting. And you say that you've gone through all of these artistic endeavors in your life as a professional, and what made you, and you've come to writing a little later in your life after pursuing a lot of these other ones. What made you decide to come to writing?
Probably like a lot of other people. I mean, I had written for, I guess like most other people who write, I had written stories as a child. I published a little neighborhood newspaper as a kid. I wrote and put on plays for the neighborhood children. When I was a nurse, I wrote research papers because I thought that was kind of fun. And so I was writing for newspapers. Just my husband and I were living on our boat for 3 years, and so I was sending back these kind of travel logs to the newspaper. And slowly, I thought, I could probably expand this out a little bit. Although, it's like climbing a mountain. When you first think about writing a novel, it's like, oh my God, can I do that? I will say that the first book, I had a wonderful little critique group through the Tallahassee Writers Association, and they explained things about structure and just basic writing skills, and about POV, point of view, how not to wander around too much, things that you don't know a lot about if you're not writing a novel. And so that was extremely helpful. But like, we've talked about before a little bit, even though I was more than grown up when I first did that, it seems to me that, if even as a young woman. There are certain things you don't do, like maybe try to conceive before you're ready. And so I was mature. I'd had a lot of experiences, and I think that that helped because I was ready to conceive a book, as it were. You know, I had a lot to draw on by that time. So, you know, for other writers out there, you know, look around, observe, use your imagination, and slowly begin to structure a story. And with help, if you can, get some people to read it and tell you, you know, is this making sense? Does it keep them involved? And you'll write some novels too. Just do it.
Awesome. So what part of the entire process of writing the book do you find the most difficult? Some other authors I've talked to, it's getting that first chapter done. Once they get that first chapter, they're moving. Or is the ending, some people find an ending's almost impossible. Is there a certain part of the process that drives you up against the wall?
That's interesting. I would say probably the ending is most difficult because usually, you know, it's like a skein of yarn, you know, you kind of throw it out and there are, you know, endings, all possibilities all over the place that you've got to weave back together and make sense, you know, both your timeline and your characters' motivations and personalities, that it makes sense. It's got to be exciting and it's got to be satisfying in the end, you know. So yeah, I would say that is maybe the most difficult thing to do. But you know, like waves, you know, you've got to pick a really good one when you're just coming up on a high, and letting it resolve nicely. But you've got to pick your wave. You know, pick that final crisis or that final, you know, denouement, so that it really is a satisfying end.
I would find that difficult also. This is a odd one, but how do you go about naming your characters? And the reason I ask that is, you know, the time frame of your book is, again, multiple time frames, and how do you go about picking like kind of time period appropriate names for the characters, or do you just have names that you love and you fit it in there?
That's interesting. I know in the very first book I wrote, he's an Indian boy from India on the island of Trinidad, but the name is totally inappropriate, but I felt that was his name. His name is Pauli, Pauli. That has nothing to do with India, but that was somehow his name. That's a good question. Certainly you don't want to have characters, although this book we're talking about now does, but try not to have them with the same consonant beginning or you know, same letter name, because that can be confusing. For me, Sergio sounded like a young person's name. Paolo sounded like an older person's name. You know, really, Carlo felt young to me.
Yeah. I was just curious about it because, you know, obviously, again, the setting and the time are so crucial to the plot of the story. And, you know, like you often hear people saying, you know, like, oh, well, that's an old person's name, or that's a, you know, young person's name, just like what you were saying.
Right. Now, I will say on last names, especially these Italian last names, I did research what were some Italian Jewish last names. Fierro, I think it is. Fierro is a name that would have been found amongst Jewish people in Italy at the time. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess you know, this is an odd one, but what do you find most difficult about writing the opposite sex of characters? Because you have strong characters, both male and female, throughout the book, and I'm just curious. Do you have challenges writing male characters? Sometimes are there different challenges than writing the female characters, or do you approach it all the same?
Certainly, I think most writers would say, fiction writers, that it's easier to write evil type people,
Sure.
people with strong personalities or, something in mind that's terrible, rather than somebody who is bland and sweet and good. That can be kind of boring. But male characters, I I don't really. I think it's, I feel it's pretty easy to step into their skin and
Sure.
feel feel pretty much the way they are. I mean, that's the same with dialogue. Not you just become them during the time you're writing their character. You see them. I could, tell you exactly what each of these people looks like. If their hair is thick or thin, or their complexion swarthy or pale. I
Right.
really have a very clear picture of what they look like. And so it is a little bit, you're like acting. You're like an actor in a play, and you're playing all the parts. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a curiosity, and I've gotten different answers from different authors, so I'm always curious what works for you. Do you have
I was just going to say, I heard a discussion on NPR the other day, and they were talking about literary fiction, which is what this is, which is, in some people's mind, a little more high-blown than popular fiction, let's say.
Sure.
Maybe they feel the words are bigger, or the language is more elaborate. But they also were talking about the fact that in literary fiction, a lot of people feel you don't go into, to put it bluntly, like a sex scene where people are intimate with each other. And I don't know. I don't think that is necessarily true, although I don't feel necessarily that comfortable writing them. And they don't go on very long. But I think it's a necessary part of the story of the individuals who have, all different dimensions of their characters, and that's one of them. So, yeah, there is a bit in each of the books that I've written, because that's a big motivation for human life.
Sure.
So,
yeah,
literary fiction it is, and hopefully written with beautiful language. But
of course. Well, an intimate scene doesn't have to be tawdry, and I think that's what they are.
Exactly.
People confuse the two on occasion.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Well, okay, we have a couple of questions here that I wanted to hop into, if that's okay with you, from the audience. Well, this is from Liz, and she says, "What is your next book so happy for you?"
Oh, I bet I know who that is. Liz J, I bet. That's a very good question. One question in my mind is, will there be a sequel to this one? Excuse me, possibly. One character is left with a number of questions. He seems to resolve them, but the reader knows that there's one big question that remains. And it would take me back to Italy and maybe elsewhere as well, which is one of the perks as a writer, is that you get to travel where your characters go. So,
okay, that's exciting. This one goes back to the photo, and in fact, I'm going to pop it back up here. But it says, "How have the locals in this photo, for example, reacted to the book? Great photo, by the way. Have you shown any of the locals any of those of the pictures or anything, or of the have any of the locals seen the book?"
Those locals anyway in Pitigliano. I mean, Pitigliano is pretty well isolated. It's for people who are interested. It's near Orvieto, kind of near Arezzo, but those people would not be speaking English, and this book has not been translated into English, into Italian. Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. All right. I think our critique group pronounced the G in Pitigliano the whole year, so it's totally silent. Say it one more time so I can be sure I can repeat it correctly. Thanks.
That's nice. Yeah. Yeah. When you see G-L-I, it's always pronounced ye, like Y-E-E. So this is Pitigliano. There's no G.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pitigliano.
All right. Well, you've got a bunch of people in the South trying to pronounce Italian names.
You know, just go ahead and give it the old pig in there. That's fine.
Yep.
That's fine.
All right, and we've got one more here. All these activities and endeavors you're accomplishing, do you think it's catharsis? Like, do you find everything you're doing cathartic?
That's I'd say fulfilling, not cathartic exactly. You know, I've written in other places about how I see things interacting with one another, that everything in the arts, we'll say, is kind of related to one another. Everything is an analog of everything else, especially, you know, if you're playing music or writing the written word or singing or painting, and you can go from one sphere into another and pick something out and appropriate it for your other art. For instance, like the word cerulean, one of my favorite words. There's some paint over there on my easel right now, cerulean. So I can use, you know, I can have a cerulean sky, which is a word I wouldn't maybe have known if I didn't paint. When you write poetry, it's music. So you're going to, you know, something musical, an analogy there. And so draping these analogs from one art form into another helps in your written word, I think helps the reader experientially understand what you're trying to say. If you can, you know, writers are told to you know, use your senses, describe the senses. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the art forms, that you can trade them back and forth. So I wouldn't say catharsis exactly, but it's more like going to the market and, you know, choosing this and that and the other thing, and then I'll make my wonderful stew at the end, I hope.
Right. Well, okay, I think that is all the questions we have, but I know that you have another little piece you could read for us, and I would love it if we could finish off that way.
Okay, let me see. Yes, this is when Giuliana, who has come in the story to actually go down into some of these tombs, and they're frightening in a way, but soon not so much. Giuliana has just been lowered into the tomb. She stood for a long time without moving. She remembered the feeling, the new child entering the classroom, hearing her name from a circle of laughing friends, others realizing that she was a Jew, the outsider, the one looking through the glass or from behind the curtain. She did not belong in this place, this tomb, this mausoleum of frantic joy and idealized death. It wasn't fear, but that the people whose bones lay here, whose lives danced along the walls, didn't need her, wouldn't want to know her. Their lives had been completed, for better or for worse, with joy and tragedy and guile and giving, and they had come to terms with the consequences. And in one moment, Giuliana could see her own life's end, the horizontal line to a tiny sputter, the trajectory of events that raged above her head, the smallness of the war, which she knew was one of many, the losing of someone you love, only to have love arrive in another form, the spent blood and the weeping and the tiny hopes that will fail, even as new ones poke their green-tipped heads from the latest misery. This would be her life, like the people here entombed, the same, pathetic, perhaps heroic, a wink in this darkness that in the end would enclose her as well. She stood shivering in the foyer, sensing that from all sides the painted figures of the tomb had taken time from their revelries to examine her, to curiously guess why she had come. She didn't feel proud of why. And then she became aware of it, low and steady, a kind of muffled tattoo. Giuliana turned the light along the base of the walls, searching for an animal, then higher, looking for a crack whose slow give would be her end. And finally, she simply laughed. "My heart," she said out loud, her voice ricocheting back and forth, and finally dwindling away before silence fell again. Silence. How different here, she thought. It is thick, through which I can walk, but which closes behind me. My heart's beat is all I have for company. And then Giuliana laughed out loud again. She was surrounded by feasters and wrestlers, a couple in the corner who seemed to be undressing one another. If I can hear my heart, maybe if I listen in a new way, I can hear them too. And in a way she didn't understand, she felt as if an invitation had been extended from the walls of the tomb. So, yes, the Etruscan tombs are very lively places, painted with all kinds of things. So.
Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate having you here, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. I just want to let you know again that you can pick this up at Midtown Reader, or you can go online to midtownreader.com, give us a call, come get the book.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.